Thank you for tuning into this video. I am very honored to have as my guest someone who's doing extremely important work, controversial work, and that's what this is all about, is trying to help the public understand the kind of things that we do in psychology. And Dr. James Cantor does things that very few people are doing, and I was hoping that he could kind of help us understand the work that he does. So I'm going to let Dr. Cantor introduce himself, and then we'll take it from there. Please, Dr.
Hi,
Cantor.
sure. My name is James Cantor. I'm the director of the Toronto Sexuality Center in downtown Toronto, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine.
Great. And if I asked you, what are you best known for, what would you say?
Probably depends on if you ask me in front of my family or in public. Or in public, I'm best known for my studies, mostly my MRI studies, figuring out what causes pedophilia or atypical sexual interest in general.
Okay. And that's one of the reasons I want to have you on, because, I mean, just say the word pedophilia, suddenly people have all these images, their schemata get triggered. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. And anybody who tries to understand it, they're going to assume there's an agenda or something like that, versus trying to understand it from a clinical perspective to try to help people. I mean, it's a problem, it's an issue that's not going away, so why not better understand it? So what would you say has been, let's say, the biggest blowback that you have received in the work that you've done?
Oh, oddly, there have been pockets of it. Mostly it's been overwhelming support.
Okay, wow, great.
In general, people have been surprisingly open to a scientific idea about what causes pedophilia. Now, I'll draw some thick borders around that, but now that people have gotten accustomed to the idea that somebody is born attracted to men or attracted to women, that's that, then a scientist coming in with a legitimate stack of brain scans and saying, being sexually attracted to children, and maybe even sexual attractions in general, is something that's built in. People at this point are well prepared to understand that. That did not turn out to be so controversial. What we do with this information has turned out to be much more controversial. So there are still people who kind of insist that they can cure pedophilia because it's somehow a choice. There exist pockets of that, but really the idea that pedophilia is something that's in the brain and not something that people pick, that part hasn't been too bad.
Okay. I know that when they were trying to kind of portray pedophilia as, let's say, a type of orientation, something that you're born with, I knew that there were some pockets of people that found that to be offensive. That.
Yes, okay. That's where it started to get sticky. Now, of course, there has been for a long time this myth about there being some association between pedophilia and plain vanilla homosexuality. Right. There's been an old stereotype that gay men are more pose somehow a risk to children.
Right.
So the idea, just even using the word sexual orientation, kind of reminds people of that association. So it's taken as either offensive or at least very questionable. Now, of course, I understand that there has been that kind of a stereotype. It's only been relatively recently that the gay community has been largely able to get over that stereotype. So having somebody use those words in the same sentence causes one pause, which makes perfect sense. But if we excuse the politics and just look at the actual data, if our definition of sexual orientation is a pattern of sexual interest that a person is born with, can't change, and they have no choice but to do the best they can with what they have, well then, yeah, pedophilia fits that definition. We might want to pick a different term because we are uncomfortable, but but the science behind it is as solid as science gets.
Okay, and what about let's say within within our profession, and yours will kind of cross a few lines that might not, as far as like what your affiliations are. Has there been any, let's say, I don't say blowback. I'd rather say, let's say, resistance on maybe medical or philosophical or psychological grounds to the approach that you've been taking, again, within the professional realm?
I think inside professional circles, the biggest questions have been over how we regulate our professional ethics.
Very important.
Because this really is where the correct thing to do, the thing that society needs us to do, the thing that our clients need us to do, is coming against people's gut emotional reaction. The minute somebody says, Doc, I got a problem, I think I'm a pedophile, the minute somebody in the public thinks, oh, you have a pedophile, shoot him, hang him, castrate him, throw him out, throw everything you can at the person. So as I say, even though the science says this guy didn't have a choice and our ethics need to follow from that knowledge, the emotions that the public has, the automatic, unbridled, reflexive, unquestioned anger is just getting in the way. Never mind getting in the way of us actually helping this person, but getting in the way of helping, society protect itself from child abuse. I mean, if we have a guy coming in saying, Doc, I think I'm a pedophile, I want help, and all we've done is structure a system so that they can't come in and get that help. Who is this? This is insane. This is not making things better for society. It's just making some activist someplace, feel better about himself or herself for expressing their righteous anger. But if we think about it for just 2 seconds, it is exactly the reverse of what we need to do. We need to make it easier for these people to come in to get therapy. We need anonymous helplines to be able to give whatever kind of talking therapies these people want. If somebody comes in wanting sex drive reducing medications, we should be able to deliver it practically no questions asked, and God forbid it's actually covered by the government. I mean, these are just the most obvious interventions, but instead we say, oh, if you have somebody coming in saying they think they're attracted to children, well, now mandatory reporting starts to kick in, and so these people know that, and they have every right to look it up before they come in. So the only result is that they don't come in. It's insane. All we've done is ban people from therapy when they're asking for help, when giving them help is going to reduce any potential risk to children. It's insane.
Right. And this is very important. That's what I was waiting for, the mandatory reporting that people may not understand. So what would be the solution? Would it be to limit mandatory reporting in that context? Or how would you want to resolve this conundrum of trying to help people who want to get help?
Well, I think there's more than one reasonable solution to the answer. Ultimately, what this comes down to is a conflict between two things that we want. We want to be able to protect children, and sometimes that means that somebody has to get reported for something. But it also means that in order to help a situation, we need to be able to maintain confidentiality.
Right.
Now, the place where we've settled on putting that compromise is just unworkable. We can use a situation or come to the point on this compromise in, for example, Germany, I think, has the most effective one. Okay. Germany still protects what we used to call doctor-patient privilege. I mean, doctor-patient privilege used to be very, very strongly protected. That's withered over the years. Germany, however, has maintained the relatively traditional sense of doctor-patient confidentiality, where they do not break confidentiality unless out-and-out murder is on the line. So if somebody is threatening to walk out the door in a psychotic fit, or any fit for that matter, to murder somebody, then they are required to break confidentiality in order to protect the people around, the potential perpetrator. But potential child abuse, they do not automatically report. Right. So because they maintain that confidentiality, well, if the person is telling the person is telling the doctor because they want help. So requiring the doctor to tell isn't going to prevent these cases. All it's going to do is keep these people away from telling the doctor in the first place. So all we have cases to gain, and we have cases that we can intervene on. But even though it makes people emotionally uncomfortable with the idea, what do you mean the doctor isn't going to call? We forget that if the patient knew the doctor was going to call, the patient wouldn't be there in the first place.
Right.
So it takes a certain fortuitiveness to take the entire line of logic to its conclusion, but that's what it is. We have to swallow our emotional gut reaction to see the obvious logic in front of our eyes. So I think another way to do it might be if there were only specifically government or college-regulated either persons or institutions who were able to handle cases like this. If there were some method, some excuse, if anonymous hotlines were possible, if internet-mediated helplines were possible. So there are many different ways in order to maintain the protections that the regulatory societies need to maintain, but the balance between the two is doing more harm than good at the moment.
So to me, I mean, the solution seems relatively simple as far as what you just described. What stops it? Is it political? Like, well, why aren't we there yet?
To give these groups their fair due, they don't have the same New York Jewish, I'll say what comes to my mind when that's what the evidence says kind of personality that I do. These are people who represent others, and they are deathly afraid of looking like they're just defending child molesters.
Right.
Nobody who maintains a private practice in a society filled with hysteria and looking for people to blame for whatever situation is in their life, right. Just a whiff of looking like you might perhaps potentially be defending a pedophile is enough to make people not want to put their names, which is what this requires, on the line in order to do what is ultimately right. So can I fault people for that? No. Can I be disappointed when people do that? Sure. But I am kind of a loudmouth. This is what I think, and if this is what the evidence is, that's what I'm going to say. But that's just a personality fluke of me.
Right. So who would it be? I mean, would it be at the federal, provincial, municipal? Like, what level? Who would be that person to actually make the change? Not to advocate for it, but to physically make that change. Who would it be? Panel? Like, what are we talking? Senate?
If one person were able to pass a law, we're going to have a society filled with bad laws. Each of the different levels of government, plus the self-governance that psychologists have amongst themselves, all input into the system, and that's how the system should work. The public themselves also have input into the system, and that's also how it should be. So I almost want to say, and I know how cliche and naive it is, but we need to help, society be able to make decisions better, period. This happens to be one of them. I think it's also one that we can do relatively easily because with, the existing evidence pointing in a relatively obvious direction. And as I say, once given the opportunity to share the science with society, audiences unanimously all of a sudden realize, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And although they might not in the moment want to reverse something that they've been accustomed to thinking all their lives, they come out thinking, I have to think about this some more. Mm-hmm. So as I said, I've been very, very impressed with most audiences. It's just that, the media can only carry, the media are what they are, and it's a controversial story, and people are uncomfortable standing up for controversial topics before they become fashionable.
Right. Okay, so basically there's a disconnect between people understanding what needs to be done and someone taking the reins and actually taking the advocacy steps to propel this into law, basically. Like, you haven't even got that far. It's just...
Yeah, no, I like how you're saying that much more than I am. I think there are many different ways that any kind of a large movement or large change can start. Sometimes it's by a public that, demands it from its profession, who then, use their contacts within government and the government regulating societies in order to implement it. Sometimes it's started by the profession itself, who educates the public and again, influences the regulations. So sometimes it's public demand that's reflected through a specific leader in a governmental position. I think each of them are valid ways to do it in a large, complicated democracy. So I think all of those are perfectly valid, and different people can use whatever their positions are, whatever their backgrounds are, in order to influence, the part of a democracy that's most open to them.
Right. Okay. Now, one thing is I'm going to have in the description some links. So I'm going to ask you to send me some links where if people need to find more information about you, the work, what they can do, that'll be up there for people to check out.
Excellent.
Okay, so now there are a few, I think, let's say misconceptions that I would hope to be able to address with you. So the first one, and I know you've talked a fair bit about this, and I've seen this in the forensics literature and so on, the distinction between, let's say, a pedophile, sex offender, child molester, like these different terms, right? Would you like to be able to, in a nutshell, kind of help people understand what is different, so they they don't just lump everyone together?
Yep. One of the biggest misconceptions that society has is that pedophile is a synonym for child molester, but they're not. Pedophilia is the actual sexual preference for children. These people find children hotter than they find adults. But that's different from a child molester. A child molester is a person who actually commits the hands-on or whatever sexual abuse of the kid. Now, there are pedophiles who are not child molesters, and there are child molesters who are not pedophiles. There are some pedophiles who essentially swear themselves to a life of celibacy, knowing that, touching a kid poses a risk of harm to the kid. Those people exist. There also exist child molesters who are not pedophiles. That situation is most common in incest situations, especially sibling-on-sibling situations. Although some incest offenders are genuine pedophiles, it's actually a minority of incest cases. And, of course, there are people who are both pedophilic and child molesters. Right. That is, these are the people who attack a kid and they prefer sexually kids. That's what motivated their behavior. So once people understand that there exist pedophiles who didn't ask to be pedophiles, are riddled with, sex drive, a male sex drive, which is pretty overwhelming, especially when one is young, these people can't tell a soul, and they can't express it. No porn, nobody to tell. They're afraid even to tell a therapist, and if they slip once, they are labeled for life. And when I say slip, even a whiff of a maybe of a slip will ruin them. Who can imagine, being perfectly successful in a situation like that? But that is exactly what we're demanding of these people. Now, of course, we have to demand that of these people, but then we're going to abandon them when we want them to be successful? Right. I mean, if I were trying to imagine a life of torture, it would look a lot like that.
Right.
So, I mean, child molesters are child molesters, and we need to deal with them appropriately through the legal system. But these other people who just find that they're turned on by something that, they can't do anything with, and they are living celibate all alone. I have nothing but sympathy for that.
Right. And that's very important, that, because, again, when you get the people who react to any ideas that just don't jibe with how they think life should be, they're going to see this as advocacy work on your part, not to help people with this horrible condition, but rather to promote an agenda, okay? Because they've been saying this for years and years. First, people, society, the psychologists, they give us way too much credit. They think we have much more power than we really have. But first, psychologists made homosexuality normal. So it goes homosexuality, then it's the pedophilia, and then bestiality. Okay, that's the ranking. Okay, that's where we're heading towards. So
usually I hear pedophilia at the very end.
Oh yeah.
Okay. No. Usually I hear it at the end. I think because people feel more protective about children, so they think it's more arousing in order to more provocative as a topic.
Gotcha. Sorry, so I got the hierarchy maybe incorrect, but I would like to be able to ask you about this because I'm not trying to look at just hypotheticals or theories. I want to help people see the real people, whether it's someone who's going through it themselves or whether it's someone who's doing the work, the kind of work that you are doing. So you are openly gay, an openly gay man. And so when you first, let's say, broach this, whether it's within the colleagues or when publicly, to try to let people know what your findings were, what was the connection people made between your sexual orientation, the work that you're trying to do? What's the worst that you heard? What have you dealt with?
Let me go from bad to good.
Okay.
The worst that I heard is, the usual expletives, the usual faggot, or, of course, this is what homos are doing. It's what we said all along. But that's, on Twitter by folks who really are just kind of puffing up in order to look tough among, in front of their peeps. It's silly and meaningless.
Right.
And if it weren't that, it would be something. Oh, if it weren't that, it would something else. It would be something else. They would, took pictures of me and they put, I'm also Jewish or Jewish descended, so they also put a big swastikas over the picture or Star of David on me, a la Holocaust. It's so if it weren't one minority status or thinking that's something that they thought was shameful, then it would be another. So I don't think that there was really an intellectual connection between my being gay and studying pedophilia. Educated folk, however, recognize that, there's got to be something in my head that, what was it? Was this part of my motivation? And it's something I've thought about a lot myself. And yeah, I think it was. Well, I think it was in more than one way. I think one is just because I was a brainy kind of a kid, and, a way that a brainy kid deals with being gay is just to ask the question, what makes me different? Why, or actually what makes everybody else different from me? Right. So really, that was just always a natural question, just growing up, a science guy. So when, many, many years later, I'm actually studying neuroscience and I'm going into sex research, the idea from what makes me different to what makes anybody into whatever it is they're into, well, that's the same question, really. That's just, the $64,000 great question version of the same thing. What is the basic structure? What causes human sexual interests? One of which is something that made me different and just, by fluke of nature, makes other people, into whatever it is that they're into. So in that way, it was connected, but it's not about being gay. It was about just being different and wanting to understand the nature of my difference. Right. And then, the general version of that question, what makes anybody different? Okay. But I would have to say, and I kind of, we talked about it briefly early before, it was in large part of what made my personality my personality. I had to grow up learning how to be different and alone and on myself and independent, and regardless of what anybody else said, this is what the evidence was, and that's that. Right. So I think, I was kind of trained or self-trained or wound up, exercising the skill to be able to stand alone when the evidence just is not following the crowd. So when I do something, again, which is controversial, or at least, controversial 30 years later than my own real development, it's the same skills. It's that I am perfectly willing to stand as alone as I need to be because this is where the evidence is. I may turn out to be right, I may turn out to be wrong, but if this is where the evidence is, this is where I'm going to be standing for now. So the ability to withstand the silly little epithets that to me is literally child's play.